They say good things come to those who wait, and I've been waiting most of my life for something like this. I have very distinct memories of getting a Super Nintendo Donkey Kong set when I was younger, and I played the heck out of it. It is the main reason why you see that game featured so much on this channel. The only bad thing that I remember about that time was how difficult it was to play at night when I wasn't supposed to because I needed a TV to play. It's also the reason why I clocked in so much time on my Game Boy because it was easier to hide under the covers. A few years before I started this channel, I was in a store in Akihabara that was selling the Superboy, and I was so close to buying one and several cartridges before I realized how impractical that would be. I was initially excited at the end of 2020 when Pocket Go announced their S30, but that interest died out when I saw the terrible processor and the aspect ratio of the screen that they paired with it. So, you can imagine my excitement when Anbernic showed me early renders of this device that you see now. They paired it with the correct aspect ratio screen, and they were going to have a processor that could completely play the entire SNES catalog without any performance issues. When I saw the device in person late last year, it looked like it was almost about ready for retail release, which is why I was so shocked and disappointed when the RG553 jumped in front of it. Well, the wait is finally over, and the little kid in me is hoping it was worth it. Let's start off by quickly going over the specs of the 353. This device comes with the RK3566 SoC with 4 Cortex A55 cores clocked at 1.8 GHz. We have a Mali-G52 GPU, 2 GB of LPDDR4 RAM, 32 GB of eMMC storage, and a 3500 mAh battery. Our screen is a 480p 3.5-inch IPS display with some interesting characteristics that we'll talk about later in this video. Aside from that, we have Wi-Fi 5 and Bluetooth 4.2, and we have dual boot Linux and Android 11 to choose from. For benchmarks, we have a single core score of 138 and a multi-core score of 385. We have a modest Vulkan score of 520 and an OpenCL score of 504. Right off the bat, the RG353 is styled after the North American Super Nintendo, and it's one of the best color combinations, in my opinion, for a gaming handheld. It's also the reason why I have so many Udon models in this exact color scheme. Obviously, a lot of these gaming companies are remixing the ideas of each other to find the ideal design, and you can see a lot of similarities between this and the products of 8BitDo. We'll talk more about those later in this video. When it comes to the layout, we have select and start at the top, followed by an LED indicator light on the right side that changes between green, yellow, and red. We also have dual color ABXY buttons in the styling of the SNES, with screen printing tightly mapped around them. On the left side, you'll find a D-pad with textured print, followed by a function button and a power button on the other side. A single press of that will put the device to sleep or wake it up, and this works in both Linux and Android. And finally, on the bottom, you have 2 recessed analog sticks with L3 and R3 functionality. These are a slightly different color than the ones that Anbernic usually uses, and they match the overall aesthetic very well. In the center of the device, we have a 4x3 screen with a resolution of 640 by 480. If you look down here, you can see that Anbernic is back to their old ways of printing their large logo under the screen, but I can forgive it because the rest of this package is so nice. On the top of the device, we have a set of SAC shoulder buttons, and these pretty much follow the design used by 8BitDo with some small changes. In the middle, you have 2 USB ports, with one acting as a DC port, meaning you'll use that for charging, and an OTG port. In Android, the DC port is used for charging and data transfer. Closer to the middle, we have our volume buttons, an HDMI port, and a reset button. We'll talk more about HDMI in just a moment. The 353 has a tapered profile with a lateral thickness near the ABXY buttons of just under 20 millimeters. The thickest point is at the top, and that clocks in at 22.5 millimeters. This is around the same thickness that you'd see in an 8BitDo controller, and it's a bit thicker than the older 351 series. I have seen a lot of talk about the size of this device, with people thinking that it's too big or that it's not pocketable. This is a bit longer than the 351 series, and it's close in length to the 3DS XL, but obviously with more thickness. I would say as long as you aren't wearing skinny jeans from the mid-2000s, you will have no problem putting this in your pocket and walking about. It is easily a pocket-friendly device. Continuing to the back, we have screen printing info on the center with 2 rubber pads on the sides. This is the same type of thing that Anbernic has used in almost all of their recent products. These give you just a bit of extra grip when you're holding this in your hand. On the bottom of the device, you'll find stereo speakers and 2 SD cards. The first one holds the Linux OS with the device booting into Android when it's removed, and the second one holds your ROMs. Dead center, you have a 3.5mm headphone jack. Now I want to talk about the D-pad. You'll notice that this button has a decent amount of texture to it, which is something that I like. This feels great to use, and the added grip from the texture makes it easy to use in fighting games like Street Fighter. It's also got a nice center post, which makes it easy to pivot. The ABXY buttons also have texture print to them, which is a slight deviation from the real controller. I like that they went with a two-color design here instead of cheaping out and going with a single color as you see on the S30. They screen printed a circle around these buttons to make it look more like an SNES controller, and at first I thought that was strange. The original design did not have screen printing on it, so I was a bit shocked to see it, but I have grown used to it. Our buttons are sitting around 2.3 millimeters from the base of the shell, which is essentially the same thing that you'd see on the 351 series. The button thickness is also essentially the same. Obviously, this is going to be a lot smaller than the buttons that were originally used on the Super Nintendo controller, and it would have been awesome to see slightly bigger buttons on the 353P if they could make it work. As for the analog sticks, these are decent. I like that they went with a custom analog color to finish off the design because this would not have looked as good with black analog sticks like the S30. You are probably aware that Anbernic is not one to do stacked shoulder buttons, but they finally did with this one, and it is a pleasant surprise. You can get input across the entire range of the R1 and L1 buttons, which I like, and you can also do the same with the R2 and L2 buttons. It's important to note that these buttons are slightly harder to press than the ones in the SF30 controller. They are both using conductive rubber buttons, but the ones on the controller are easier to press and nicer to use. The R2 and L2 buttons have a slightly strange shape to them compared to the controller. I would have liked if they could have implemented this small divot that you see here in the corner because it's a perfect resting spot for your index finger. The 353 also has a divot, but it's much smaller and it's not as ergonomic. Because this is largely based on something that was already built to be ergonomic, this device has some clear benefits. You have rounded edges around the entire device, with a bigger tapered edge on the back that fits nicely into your hand without creating any discomfort. When you're playing retro games, you've got this kind of arrangement here, and the ABXY buttons are small enough that you can get to all of them without having to move your thumb that much. The same can be said about all of the D-pad directions. The shoulder buttons are also easy to get to with small movements, and you can maintain most of your original grip if you need to play a game that uses the left analog stick. That's going to be more common than the one on the right with this processor. The rubber on the back doesn't do anything to aid in ergonomics. These keep your fingers from coming into contact with the back shell, which can get warm depending on the types of games that you're playing. The next thing that I want to talk about is the case and the build quality of this device. I would say that build quality is a huge highlight of this product. This one is much better than the recent Anbernic devices, and the differences are night and day. To understand why, I think you need to go back to how consoles and controllers felt from this period. They used very robust ABS plastics, and even the cartridges were robust. You can feel that robustness in this new device. It has the same surface texture as the SNES, which only adds to the nostalgia, and I think that this is something that other companies have been banking on for a long time. From what I can tell, Anbernic did a great job of copying that formula for this product. When it comes to the injection mold quality, I'm not seeing too many things that worry me. There are some slight injection marks near the right analog stick and the D-pad that you would probably not see unless it was in person, and there is also another one on the back in the corner. The rest of this is a super solid product. It even feels structurally stronger than all of Anbernic's products, and you can see that by just looking at the side. As you can see, we have two shells that come together to make this device. Both of these have ridges that add to the stability of this device as a whole. If you look at something like the RG552, which uses the quote-unquote typical Anbernic design, it uses a three-piece design with two almost flat panels joined together with an outer ring. This design gives you very little stability. It doesn't play a large part when your devices using this design are smaller like the RG351 that doesn't have too much play to it when you try to warp it, but it does not scale up well when you have a longer device with an even longer area for the screen. It just turns into a wave pool. The 503 had at least one strong ridge to give it stability with no center ring, so that was an improvement over the three-part design, but this one is much better. If this used a metal frame under the screen, it would be almost impossible to warp this. I think Anbernic really knocked it out of the park with this one, and it is the first product of late that I think lives up to the build quality characteristic that people attribute to this company. So we have a 4:3 aspect ratio screen, and this is going to be perfect for the types of systems that this processor can emulate. That's going to be things like SNES, Genesis, N64, Dreamcast, PS1, and other TV-based systems. Those systems can also run on RK3326 based devices, but you'll find that you can bump up the resolution and get better performance with the RK3566. So this is going to be a clear upgrade path for people that are still rocking a nuclear-resistant RK3326 device. This is an OCA IPS screen, so you're going to have near 90-degree viewing angles in all directions, and you are going to have improved visibility. Thankfully, we don't suffer from any significant color distortion when we view content at an angle on this screen either. I think for a lot of potential fans of this, the only negative is going to be the big branding that people do not like. Admittedly, I would have liked if something else could have filled up this space, but these old screens have driver chips that extend out pretty far outside the active viewing area of the display, which is probably what is behind this logo. To be able to talk about this more, we need to boot into Android. So I'm going to shut off the device, remove the SD card from the TF1 slot, and reboot the device into Android. Now, I anticipated that I would be using Android for everything with this product, but I think you're going to be impressed when we look at Linux in just a bit. First, you can see that Screen Info reports that we have a 640 by 461 resolution screen, but that's not accounting for the entire display. What I want you to focus on is what it says under refresh rate. 124 Hz. That is a strange refresh rate for a screen, and I'm pretty shocked that more people aren't talking about this. You can also see that this application is reporting that the screen is also 124 Hz, but this does have the correct resolution. Now, if we go to benchmark the screen, even this benchmark says that this is 124 Hz, but this animation wouldn't be this fast if it was a real screen of this refresh rate. I have never seen something like this, and I can't get a clear answer from the company about what is happening here. They've been kind of skirting the question by saying maybe it can't always be 124 Hz, but I don't care. Is it a 124 Hz screen? Because those don't exist, and I don't know if there will be any negative impacts to emulation because of this. Even if we use VSync Tester, which shows that there is a bunch of crazy shit going on with this screen, it still says this is a 90 Hz screen, which makes sense. There are 90 Hz screens. Even RA reports the refresh rate as 124 Hz in the overlay and in the estimated refresh rate menu. So what is it? Is it a 90 Hz screen? Is it a 60 Hz screen? Or is it bad software? I don't know. What I can say is that I haven't seen any negative consequences from this, and it's not readily apparent if this is higher than 60 due to the performance of the system and how small the screen is unless I record this in slow motion and counted the frames. But I don't want to do that. It should be easier to get a straight answer from the company. I don't know why they wouldn't clarify what this is, but I am going to find out one way or the other eventually, and I will make sure to put that in the pinned comment when that happens. I will also say that this issue, I won't say problem, is reported like this in Linux and in Android, so at least it is consistent. One final point that I want to make about the screen in Android is that you are not able to customize the color temperature even though Android has this feature baked in. In the menu, it is set to boosted, but you can't go down to anything else. I am now used to this, but it was a little warm to my liking when I first got it, and I would have liked to be able to set this to something cooler. On the topic of brightness, this screen isn't too bright at the maximum level, but it is good. The lowest value also isn't that low, and it is almost a little too high to play at night in bed, but I have played it on the last 2 nights without too many issues. Now we're at the point of the review that has been the biggest pain point for me as a reviewer for the last 2 products. And that is mainly because I'm not of the belief that a company that makes multiple millions of dollars a year in sales should not be expected to provide working software for their products. This is so asinine, and I can't even believe there is any disagreement over this topic. This would not be acceptable in any other market except this one. I am hoping that all of the issues that I found in the last 2 products do not exist in any form in this one. So for the record, let's go over the main issues that I found and pointed out that we will be looking for on this product. On the RG552, we had an inexcusable amount of audio delay and some strange screen rotation issues. On the RG503, we had terrible performance in N64 and several other systems whenever you did not push a button. That was a fun one. I'm just going to state right now, I don't want to see any of these on this device. If they don't exist, this is already a much better product than those ones. Let's start with the strangest issue that people were not talking about for some reason. The FPS would improve only when you pressed a button. As you can see, I am not pressing any buttons, and there's no difference when I do. So far, so good. Up next, high audio delay across the system as measured by Metroid Fusion. Audio delay is within the acceptable range. We are 2 for 3. Finally, screen rotation issues. The screen is rotated the correct way. This is amazing, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Now, let's look at this system more generally. In the UI settings, we have a few themes that we can pick from that are pre-installed. The default one is decent, but some of the other ones are going to come down to personal preference. I like to see more than one system on screen at a time, so I know which direction to path over to, so this one is going to be the best for me. We will look at gaming performance later in this video, but for the most part, Anbernic devices in the 351 series gave you decent performance on the stock firmware for almost all of the low-end systems, and that's the case on this device too. But what I want to quickly take a look at is N64 performance and Dreamcast performance in this Linux system. I've seen people talking about the Dreamcast performance being bad on the stock firmware, and I am not seeing that at all. Again, we have a big section coming up for performance in just a bit. This is just to see if the Linux system is usable out of the box. So, for Dreamcast, we have Crazy Taxi running here on the stock firmware with no changes, without issues.
Go straight! Yeah, I got it!
Sonic Adventure 2 is also decent with some slight slowdowns.
Suspect seen heading south. Block all major roads and capture the suspect.
Moving over to N64 again with the stock firmware and no changes done to the settings, we are getting good performance in F-Zero. When it came time to test GoldenEye, my controls were a bit wonky and I had to remap them, but after that, the game also did well with some slight slowdown here and there. So yeah, good performance in Dreamcast and N64 with the stock Linux firmware. Now let's go over HDMI. Unfortunately, you cannot hot plug the HDMI cable in the Linux system. You can do this under Android without problems, but you can't do that here. You'll have to reboot between both actions, and that's a good thing and a bad thing. It is a good thing because the HDMI signal that is sent to the screen is a native 16:9 resolution, and it is not stretched from 4:3 to 16:9. That is a huge benefit of the Linux system over Android. This feature makes the Linux system the platform of choice for docking this device to a TV. Anyway, that's it for the Linux system. Let's go over Android. I've already gone ahead and configured the system so we can wake up the device now and unlock it. We have a Windows 95 background, which seems fitting for our styling, and we have icons and folders around the outside edge. The first thing that you need to know is that this system does not come with any form of an app store out of the box. This is a very simple problem to fix on the device without the need for a PC. Before doing that, I did go through and delete most of the apps that were pre-installed because a lot of them are just terrible filler emulators that you would not want to use on this device. I think they were just worried about having so few apps installed that they went ham and included anything and everything, but you don't need them. Once that's done, head over to the Aurora website and download the store with the Chrome browser on the device and install the app when it's finished. Go through the installation process, and when you get to the login screen, you can use Anonymous if you do not want to use your Google account or you do not have a Google account that you use for only devices like these that I've talked about before. After you've done those simple steps, you have access to the Google Play Store in less than 2 minutes without a PC. Let's pull down from the top now and go over some of the things here. You'll see that we have key mapping here. Haven't used this at all because I have much better devices for purposes like this, but it is there if you need it. We also have this thing called auto mode, and if you press that, it's pretty easy to understand what's happening here. High mode is just going to lock all of your CPU cores and hopefully your GPU to the highest frequencies. This has situational use on this processor, so you don't need to feel like you have to use this option. Auto mode is good enough and it won't generate unnecessary heat. Aside from that, this is an Android 11 system that is essentially a stock Android image with very minimal changes, but it gets the job done. It's not the fastest system performance because we only have 2 GB of RAM, but it's fairly snappy. It took a bit to get used to, but now I'm completely comfortable with this configuration. One thing that I want to mention is that I have enabled gesture commands. I'm sure most of you guys know what that is, but that just means we can swipe up from the bottom to switch apps and swipe from the left or right side to back out. This has the obvious benefit of being able to maximize our screen space without wasting it on software buttons. In practice, this should work well on this device, but it's not working as well as it could. The option that I have picked should be able to function no matter what, but sometimes there is an option that requires you to swipe up from the bottom slightly to activate the back function. That option is gone, and it means we have to do this awkward song and dance each time we want to try and back out from something by swiping. The function button also serves this purpose, so it's not the biggest issue, but my muscle memory is already there after many years, and it's very difficult to transition over to the button instead of swiping. Another strange thing that I want to point out is that the touchscreen is mapped as a controller for some strange reason, and you can see that this testing app thinks that I am using 2 controllers right now, the touchscreen and the device itself. In my limited testing, I did find one application that stopped working with the onboard controls because of this. Dead Cells seems to just take the touch controller as the main controller and refuse to take any inputs from my physical controls. I did test out other games after finding this out, and I wasn't able to find this issue again, but other examples could exist. I want to briefly talk about the audio quality of this device. At the maximum level, the speakers are not particularly that loud, but they should be good enough for normal indoor environments. We don't have any kind of sound chamber on this product, and the speakers are pretty much just firing directly out through the bottom. This usually means that we would have almost no bass, but the company seems to have configured their DSP to boost the low end at the expense of the overall audio quality when it is high. That being said, it's perfectly adequate. There is, however, one issue with these speakers, and it relates to another feature of this device that isn't too much of a concern to me. If you are planning to use this for game streaming, you will find you can hear near constant audio interference from the onboard Wi-Fi in the right speaker. This is not a new issue for Anbernic, as this was a really bad problem on the original RG351P before they removed the Wi-Fi right before the launch, but it is present here. It's not as bad as it was on that product, but it's annoying enough that I would never use this for game streaming if I wasn't going to use headphones. It's important to state right now that this is not a software issue, and it's not something that can be fixed by software. Signal interference like this is strictly a hardware issue. You can mask it, but you can never remove it if the audio driver is in use. The RG503 also has this problem, so hopefully this is something that the company pays more attention to going forward because it is 100% avoidable. While we are on the topic, I went ahead and did a teardown to look inside. The first thing that I'm noticing is that the Wi-Fi module is on the other side of the device from the speaker that has the most audio interference from Wi-Fi use. We have a rumble motor on the side, and this is my favorite type. The RP2 Plus also used this rumble motor before they did a stealth removal after the launch, but Anbernic has it. Anbernic usually puts this in the center of the device where it can better spread out the feeling, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of open space for them to use for that purpose. Our processor is right here in the center, and they kind of just slapped a thermal pad on the top of this, which is a bit ghetto on a product of this price. Anbernic usually uses heat shields over their processor, and this one could benefit from one. They didn't do this on the 503, but that has a larger PCB that can absorb some of the heat generated from the processor. This one doesn't, and the processor can get a bit toasty depending on what you're playing. The highest temps that I saw were above 70 Celsius, and this was in a room with the AC set to 22 Celsius. If you live in hotter climates, it could be worse than that, and most of that heat is being dumped right into the battery. It's the only downside to this kind of design when you also want to use a battery that is bigger than 1000 to 2000 milliamps. Anyway, let's finally go over the performance of this device. As I've already mentioned, this system is going to do well in any TV-based system because of our aspect ratio, but you can also use other systems if you're not against black borders. We also have plenty of power in here to play a ton of FBA and MAME games if that's what you like. For me, my favorite systems on this device are the 16-bit era consoles like Genesis and SNES. Both of these systems perform very well on this processor. Even systems that run well on the 351 series devices have more options on this new platform. PlayStation 1, for example, can use DuckStation with the resolution upscale to 2x native to fill out our screen. When it comes to DS, we can use the Drastic emulator with the 3D upscaling option to get more out of our games and make more use out of the 3566. N64 is the first system where there is a night and day difference between it and the 351 series. On those older devices, you would typically see these games run at 240p to increase performance. On this new device, we can run those games at 480p, and we have the benefit of basically going plug and play for most of these titles without any need to fuss with any settings if we use RA. In more demanding games, we still have the option of using the standalone emulator after we make some one-time tweaks. PSP also sees a slight boost in performance over what you'd see on the RK3326, but this is not a processor that can handle the entire library. In this example, the system is set to stretch out the games to fill out the screen, but if you don't want this, you can go with black bars to maintain the 16:9 image.
Health hack!
Press and hold the triangle.
Sega Saturn's performance is also decent on this chip, but it's going to come down to the game that you're using and the options that you've picked. Most of these games will have some form of frame skip going on in the background, but many games run well on the 353. Now, we turn our attention to Dreamcast. As I've already showed, the Linux system gives pretty decent performance out of the box without any need to fuss with anything at all. We can get slightly better performance than that stock experience over on Android if we want with Flycast.
Go straight!
Just shut up and let's roll!
My head hurt! Pay more attention!
This final system is only here because the app was pre-installed out of the box. GameCube is not meant for a processor that is this weak, and even though you can find some games that will run, there are far better options on the market than this. I think that you would be hard-pressed to find many games that can run well. And when it comes down to battery life, it's pretty decent on this device. This is the range that I got after doing a litany of tests with my device. Let's wrap up this review with my pros and cons of the RG353 and my overall recommendations. On the pro side, we have quite a few things to talk about. First and foremost, we have functional day one firmware that is good enough for most users. If you have your heart set on Linux, You don't have to wait around for custom firmware to enjoy this device, and you also don't need to think of the stock firmware as a cool demo. The next point from here is definitely the design. I think Anbernic knocked this out of the park, and it was much better than I thought it was going to be after I saw the updated design last month. I love that we can dual boot into Android, which I originally thought was going to be the saving grace of this device, but even the Linux system is decent. I like that the Linux system can output native 16:9 when it is connected over HDMI. The build quality on this device is by far the best of any Anbernic product. The final point is that this device has great ergonomics. Now let's talk about cons. The rubber used in the shoulder buttons is not as good as it probably should be, and I think they could have refined their formula to improve the feel of the buttons. I also think the R2 and L2 buttons could be designed a bit better to add to the overall ergonomics of the device. The stock Android firmware could be a bit better than this, and it does not make a lot of sense why they did not have this shipping with Google Play when it's so easy to do so. The most important thing out of everything here, though, is the price, and there's no dancing around the issue with that. After the promotional pricing ended, this is now a $140 device with free 4PX shipping included. If we consider that that is on average a $10 benefit, this is selling for $130, which is on the higher end of things at this point, given that we live in a post-2+ world now. If you remove the affiliate revenue that people like me can make by generating a sale based on a link, this would be closer to $120, all things considered. This is selling locally in China for around $107, and that is well within my green recommendation area for this product. As for my overall recommendation for this device at $140, I would say it depends on the person watching this video. When I was in Tokyo all those years ago, I was about to spend the same amount of money just to get the Superboy, and that has way less functionality and a worse screen. Before you say down in the comments, yes, I know the RP2 Plus is more powerful than this, and I also know that it's cheaper. I also know that Anbernic could sell this at a lower price and still make a lot of money. The difference in all of that is that Retroid isn't making a device in this style. And this is the style that I wanted for a long time. I would have gladly paid more for the asking price of $140 to get this product. If you had a similar childhood as I did, there is probably something in here for you as well. As for my plans with the RG353, I am going to use this almost exclusively for SNES and use my other devices for other systems. I've already beaten 2 games since I got it, and nothing else comes close. If you enjoyed this review, show your support by leaving a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It really helps out a lot. Happy gaming, everyone. Taki out.